The morning light filtered softly through the tall sash windows of the Kingsley home in Notting Hill. Eleanor stirred her tea absent-mindedly, the faint chime of the spoon echoing in the stillness of the kitchen. It was her birthday, though you wouldn't know it from the silence in the house. Henry had left early, claiming he had an urgent client meeting in Croydon, another extension project, he said, one that couldn't wait. She looked at the table. A single envelope rested next to the fruit bowl, her name written hastily on the front. It wasn't a card. Not really. Just a folded piece of printer paper with a message typed out. Happy birthday, Elle. We'll celebrate this weekend. Love, H. No kiss. No warmth. Eleanor had grown used to Henry's detachment. 7 years of marriage had taught her not to expect the romantic gestures she used to dream of. He always said he wasn't good at that sort of thing. Not wired that way, he'd shrug, whenever she hinted at missing flowers or dinners. Yet something felt different this year. Not just the forgotten breakfast or the absence of a gift. It was the tone in his voice last night, the rushed way he had spoken, how he'd barely looked up from his phone. She glanced around their impeccably decorated townhouse, a place she'd poured her soul into. Every piece of furniture, every vase, every muted color palette had been chosen with care. Yet lately, she felt like a guest in her own home. Her phone buzzed with a message from her sister. Happy birthday, Elle. I hope Henry's planning something special. You deserve it. Eleanor didn't reply straight away. She didn't want to lie. Mid-morning came and went. She tidied the house, more out of habit than purpose. Then, just past noon, the doorbell rang. A courier stood outside, holding a cream-colored gift box wrapped with navy blue ribbon. For Mrs. Kingsley, he said, handing it over with a polite nod. The label read, from Henry. Eleanor smiled faintly and carried it to the dining table. She undid the ribbon carefully, unfolded the tissue paper, and froze. Inside lay a designer handbag, sleek, modern, far more fashionable than her usual style. She touched the leather strap hesitantly. It was lovely, yes, but unfamiliar. Too unfamiliar. Something tugged at her memory. She pulled out her phone, opened her gallery, and scrolled back to a photo taken at Henry's firm's end-of-year party. There it was. That handbag. Slung across the shoulder of a tall brunette. Standing beside Henry. Laughing with her hand on his chest. The woman's name, she remembered now, was Lydia Hart. And the handbag had been hers. Eleanor's breath caught, not in anger, but in understanding. Henry wasn't clueless about romance. He just hadn't bothered when it came to her. Eleanor placed the handbag back into the box and gently closed the lid. Her hands didn't shake. Her breathing stayed even. But her mind was racing. She walked upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand. She knew she couldn't confront Henry without more. A handbag could be dismissed. Misunderstood. No, she needed something indisputable. Opening her laptop, Eleanor typed in the name of the boutique printed on the gift receipt tucked inside the box. The shop was in Chelsea, a luxury designer outlet she'd never stepped foot in. She rang the number. Good afternoon. This is Elodie at Maison Duval. How may I help you? Eleanor smiled politely, keeping her voice light. Hello, I'm just confirming a purchase made yesterday under the name Henry Kingsley. A handbag, delivered this morning. There was a pause as the woman searched the system. Yes, I see the transaction. Picked up in person, yesterday afternoon. Is there an issue? In person? Eleanor repeated. Are you sure it wasn't a delivery? No, definitely picked up. Signed for by a woman, Lydia Hart. Eleanor's stomach turned. Thank you. That's all I needed. She ended the call and sat still, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Lydia Hart. So it wasn't just a gift he had bought with her in mind, it had physically passed through the mistress's hands. There was a knock at the door. Eleanor jolted, her heart jumping. But it wasn't Henry. Just the post. She stepped downstairs and checked the door camera. No one in sight. Just the postman leaving. She picked up a parcel and walked back into the lounge, but something tugged at her. On impulse, she opened the shared cloud account Henry had set up for their home's CCTV system. The app loaded slowly. Then came the thumbnails, motion detected in the hallway camera the night before. She tapped on the clip. The footage was grainy in the evening light, but clear enough. Henry unlocking the front door. A woman with him. Tall, with long hair. Lydia. She entered like she'd been there before. He took her coat. Smiled. Then disappeared together into the kitchen, just out of frame. Eleanor closed the app and leaned back in the armchair, her heart strangely quiet. No tears. No trembling. She had her answer. But this was only the beginning. Eleanor didn't leave the house that afternoon. The quiet seemed to close in around her, thick with anticipation. She sat at the dining table, staring at the documents she had printed off earlier, Henry's calendar, a list of appointments, the receipts she'd gathered from the boutique. Every piece of paper felt like a fragment of a larger puzzle. But the bigger question loomed in her mind, how long had this been going on? She glanced at the clock. It was almost 6, and Henry hadn't called, texted, or even emailed. He was usually punctual when it came to work. But today, there was no message. The hours stretched on. Eleanor tried to busy herself, but nothing seemed to matter. The silence in the house grew heavier, more oppressive. The small hum of the fridge, the distant sound of cars in the street, it was all she could hear. She picked up her phone again, hesitated, then dialed Lydia's number. Her heart raced, but her hand was steady. It rang twice before Lydia picked up. Hello. Lydia's voice sounded lighter than Eleanor had expected, almost too carefree. I think we need to talk, Eleanor said, her voice calm but firm. There was a long pause. Then, Lydia spoke. About what exactly? About Henry. About you. About the gift he gave me this morning. Lydia laughed. What a coincidence. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. He's not the only one who gets confused, you know. Eleanor felt a rush of anger stir inside her, but she held her ground. I'm not confused, Lydia. I'm perfectly clear on what's happening here. Another silence, then Lydia sighed. You're right, Eleanor. It's not fair to pretend. But don't be so sure you're in control of this situation. It's too late for that now. The line went dead. Eleanor sat there for a moment, her phone still pressed to her ear. She had expected Lydia to be defensive, but the coldness of her words struck her deeply. There was something far colder at play here. This wasn't about love. This wasn't even about Henry. It was a game, a ruthless one, and Lydia had already won. But not for long. The days following the call were a blur. Eleanor's life seemed to settle into a rhythm of controlled chaos. She would go to work, return home, and pretend that nothing had changed. But everything had changed. She avoided Henry's gaze when he came home late, his scent still clinging to him, the faint trace of her perfume on his collar. She ignored his attempts at small talk, each word from him an effort to claw back the normalcy they once shared. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Eleanor flipping through a magazine, Henry absent-mindedly scrolling through his phone, he finally broke the silence. I've been thinking, Henry said, his tone light, but there was something off about it. Eleanor didn't look up. About the trip, he continued, as if he were trying to gauge her reaction. You know, the one I mentioned a while ago. To Paris. Eleanor's eyes flickered to him, then back to the magazine. Right. I thought it might be a good idea for us to get away. Just the two of us. It's been a while since we had a chance to reconnect. She closed the magazine, placing it carefully on the coffee table. Reconnect, she repeated, the word leaving a bitter taste in her mouth. Henry smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Yeah. You know what I mean. Eleanor stood up. You can take your trip to Paris, she said coolly, but it won't be with me. Henry blinked, confused. What do you mean? We need this, Eleanor. No, she said firmly. You need this. But not with me. There was a silence, a long pause. Henry's confusion slowly morphed into frustration. I don't understand, he muttered, almost to himself. Eleanor met his gaze, her eyes cold. You never did. With that, she walked away. But as she did, a small smile tugged at her lips. For the first time in weeks, she felt in control. It was a week before Henry's birthday, and the tension in the house was palpable. Eleanor had spent the last few days making plans, carefully piecing together the puzzle that had been their marriage. She knew the truth now, and there was no going back. On the morning of Henry's birthday, Eleanor woke up early. She could hear him moving around in the kitchen, trying to make coffee, his movements a little slower than usual. She didn't join him. Instead, she spent the morning preparing a gift for him. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a small box wrapped in simple paper. The gift inside was something he would never expect, a framed photograph of the two of them on their wedding day. She placed it carefully on the dining table, a reminder of the life they once had. When Henry finally came into the room, he didn't immediately notice the gift. He walked over to the coffee machine, his back to her. Eleanor watched him for a moment, feeling strangely detached. It was hard to imagine the man in front of her as the same person she had once loved. Happy birthday, she said, her voice calm. Henry turned, finally noticing the box on the table. He raised an eyebrow. What's this? You'll see, Eleanor replied, her eyes never leaving him. He sat down, opening the box slowly, as though he were unsure of what to expect. When he saw the photo, his face hardened. This is weird, he muttered, his eyes flicking between the photo and Eleanor. Eleanor stood up, her hands clasped behind her back. I thought it might remind you of the person you used to be. The person I thought I married. Henry set the photo down, a sigh escaping his lips. Eleanor, please, not today. Eleanor's expression didn't change. Today is the day, Henry. This is the day I stop pretending. Henry opened his mouth to say something, but before he could, there was a knock at the door. Eleanor turned towards the sound, her heart racing for a moment. She knew exactly who it was. She could feel it. As Henry went to answer the door, Eleanor took a deep breath. She had no more tears left to shed. She had no more energy to give. This was it. The game was over. The door creaked open, and Eleanor's instincts immediately told her that the visitor wasn't someone she was prepared for. Henry had just opened the door when a voice called out from the hallway. Henry! It's MIA. I know you're in there. Eleanor felt her heart skip a beat. The sound of Mia's voice was sharp, demanding, as if she was accustomed to getting whatever she wanted. A chill ran down her spine, but she quickly steeled herself, her expression unreadable. Henry's eyes darted back and forth between Eleanor and the door, his discomfort almost palpable. He took a deep breath and went to meet MIA in the doorway, his shoulders slumping in resignation. MIA stood there, dressed in a tight-fitting black dress, her hair sleek and shiny, her lips painted in a bold red. She looked at Henry with a certain expectation in her eyes, and Eleanor could tell that MIA had no idea what had been happening inside the house these past few days. Happy birthday, darling, MIA said sweetly, stepping forward to plant a kiss on Henry's cheek. Henry stiffened but didn't pull away. "MIA, what are you doing here?" "I wanted to surprise you," she replied with a wink, her gaze flickering to Eleanor. "But it looks like I'm interrupting something." Eleanor stood there, unmoving, her hands folded in front of her. She wasn't going to give MIA the satisfaction of showing any emotion. Mia's gaze lingered on Eleanor, but she didn't seem fazed. "I hope you're not upset, Eleanor," she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "It's just that Henry and I have connected in a way you and I never did." Eleanor felt her stomach tighten, but she didn't flinch. "I'm not upset," she said coolly, her voice steady. "I'm simply watching the inevitable unfold." MIA raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a smile. "Oh, so you've finally realized, haven't you? Henry wasn't the problem. You were just never good enough for him." Eleanor's heart ached, but she didn't let it show. "Funny," she replied, her words slow and deliberate. "I thought the problem was that he wasn't good enough for me." For a moment, there was silence. MIA looked taken aback, her smirk faltering. Henry glanced nervously between them, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. Finally, MIA spoke again, her voice slightly more guarded. "Well, I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. "You'll just have to get used to it." Eleanor took a deep breath and stepped forward, her expression hardening. "I don't need to get used to anything," she said quietly. "This is over." MIA looked at her, a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. Eleanor stood her ground, unflinching. The power dynamic had shifted. MIA was no longer the one in control. As MIA left the house, slamming the door behind her, Eleanor let out a slow breath. It was over. She had said the words that had been building inside her for so long. The days following Mia's visit felt strangely calm. Eleanor had done the hardest part. She'd declared that it was over, and she wasn't going back. Now, she had to finish what she'd started. No more second chances. As she sat in the living room, a package arrived. It was neatly wrapped in silver paper, with a ribbon tied in a bow. Her heart sank when she saw the name on the card, "For Eleanor, with love from Henry." It was a birthday gift, a late one, and from the looks of it, something extravagant. Henry had been so unpredictable lately. After his failed attempt to win her back with words, he had started throwing material things into the mix. It had become a pattern, almost as if he thought he could buy her back, that a gift could erase the hurt he had caused. Eleanor wasn't fooled. She had seen that behavior before in other relationships. When words failed, some thought shiny things would succeed. But it would take more than gold or jewels to fix the mess he had made. The box was elegantly designed, and Eleanor, despite herself, felt her curiosity spike. She could already guess what it was. A piece of jewelry, something expensive, like the ones she'd seen in the past. But as she peeled back the paper, her eyes widened in disbelief. It wasn't jewelry. It was a small, delicate watch. A brand she recognized immediately, Vaughan & Company. The very same brand MIA had been wearing the other day when she walked into their house. The watch had been Mia's gift from Henry, a token of their shared time, their moments together. The realization hit Eleanor like a punch to the gut. The watch wasn't just a gift, it was a message. It was as if Henry was rubbing his affair in her face one last time. He knew what he was doing. He wanted to show Eleanor that MIA had a place in his life now. He wanted to make her feel insignificant. But what Henry failed to realize was that Eleanor wasn't the same woman she used to be. She wasn't broken, and she wasn't going to beg him to stay. Instead of feeling anger, Eleanor felt something else, control. She picked up the watch, examining it closely, turning it over in her hands. It was beautiful, but it had no power over her. She had the power now. She wasn't going to let him use his wealth to manipulate her emotions. Not anymore. Eleanor placed the watch on the table, looking at it one last time. It was his last attempt to manipulate her, his final piece of the game he'd been playing. But now, the game was over. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Henry. "I know I hurt you, Eleanor. I'm sorry. Please, let's talk about this." But Eleanor didn't respond. She turned off her phone and left the house. The next steps were already clear. She wasn't going to waste any more time on someone who saw her as a second option. She had too much to do, too much to reclaim. Eleanor was no longer the woman who had entered this marriage with dreams of a perfect life. The woman who had put up with lies and deceit for far too long had been replaced by someone else. Someone stronger, more resolute. The woman she had become was someone who understood her worth. After Henry's last desperate attempt at communication, Eleanor knew there was no turning back. She had spent the last few weeks preparing herself for this final step, for the end of this chapter in her life. And now, with a clear head and a heavy heart, she was ready. She returned home from a meeting with her lawyer, a firm resolve in her chest. The divorce papers were ready. The documents had been carefully drafted, the terms fair yet firm. Henry had already signed, though it seemed he had no idea what was coming next. When Eleanor stepped into the living room, she found Henry sitting there, his eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and desperation. His face showed traces of guilt, but there was still the hint of arrogance that had always been there. He stood as soon as he saw her. "I thought we could talk," he began, his voice soft, almost pleading. "I know I've hurt you, but maybe we can figure this out. We've been through so much together." Eleanor looked at him, her heart no longer wavering. She had heard this speech before. The promises, the apologies, the guilt-ridden words. But none of it mattered anymore. She had given him more than enough chances. "No, Henry. It's too late for that," she said, her voice calm yet firm. "I've made my decision." Henry looked at her, his face falling. "You don't have to do this. We can fix it." But Eleanor shook her head. She had done everything she could to salvage their relationship, but he had already crossed the line. There was no going back now. "I don't want to fix it," she said, her tone steady. "I want to move forward. And that means without you." She handed him the divorce papers. His hands trembled as he took them, staring at them as if they were the final blow. Eleanor stood tall, knowing she had made the right decision. She was free now, and nothing would hold her back. Henry didn't speak. He didn't argue. He simply took the papers and walked out, leaving her with nothing but the silence of a home that no longer felt like hers. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt a sense of peace. She had made the hard choice, but it was the right one. There was no more emotional turmoil, no more lies. Only a future that was hers to shape, free from the weight of betrayal. As she sat down in the now empty living room, Eleanor took a deep breath. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, and perhaps moments of doubt. But she also knew that she was stronger now. She was in control.